Ever feel like you're talking to a brick wall? When you're trying to like get someone to see your side of things. It's I don't know. It's like some people just have this knack for getting others on board, right? So today we're diving deep into persuasion. Not the, sneaky manipulative kind, but like the real deal, how to connect with people and get win-win outcomes. Our guide for this deep dive is, well, it's called The Art of Persuasion. One of the first things that really jumped out at me was, well, it's almost counterintuitive. The book argues that persuasion isn't about, strong-arming people. It's about making them feel good. Think about it. When someone makes you feel respected, understood, you're way more open to hearing them out, right? This whole idea, it really reminded me of this awkward encounter I had a while back. I was at this networking event. You know how those can be. Lots of forced smiles, awkward small talk. Anyway, I was chatting with this guy, trying to pitch him on this new project I was working on, but he just wasn't having it. Kept interrupting me, checking his phone. I was getting frustrated thinking, dude, just listen. But then I kind of realized maybe I was the one being a brick wall. Was I really listening to him? Or just waiting to talk? Looking back, I was so focused on getting my point across that I totally missed the chance to connect with him, on a human level. And the book, it really stresses that's where persuasion starts, with empathy, understanding where the other person is coming from. There's this story in the book that really shifted my perspective. It's about this man on the subway, one of those packed, New York City trains. His kids are running around, being loud, grabbing newspapers. It's chaos. And everyone's giving him the stink eye thinking, control your kids, man. But then the man looks up, and it's clear he's been crying. Turns out his wife had just died suddenly. And he was taking his kids home from the hospital. Kids were acting out because they were grieving. And the poor dad he was completely overwhelmed. Reading that story, it made me realize how quick we are to judge. We see this tiny snapshot of someone's life and make assumptions without knowing the full story.
And that's the opposite of empathy, right? Like, how can you connect with someone if you aren't even trying to understand them? So the book suggests this idea of putting yourself in the other person's moccasins. But it's not just about imagining what it's like to be them. It's about actively trying to understand, asking questions, listening without judgment, really trying to see the world through their eyes, which, isn't always easy, right? Especially when you're dealing with someone you disagree with. But here's the thing. Persuasion isn't about winning an argument. It's about finding that common ground. And that starts with understanding. So next time you need to persuade someone, take a moment to see things from their side. You might be surprised at what you discover. Okay, so we've talked about understanding others, but what about those practical techniques, those Jedi mind tricks I mentioned? Well, the book is packed with them, and they're surprisingly simple, like take the power of gratitude. We all like to be thanked, right? But it goes way deeper than that. When you genuinely appreciate someone's effort, it motivates them to go above and beyond.
I remember this one time I was working on this super stressful project, crazy hours, missing sleep, the whole bit. And honestly, I was starting to burn out. Then my boss pulled me aside and said, hey, I just wanted to say how much I appreciate your work on this. You're going above and beyond, and it's not going unnoticed. Now, it wasn't like he gave me a raise or anything, but just that acknowledgement, it really re-energized me, made me feel valued, and it pushed me to keep going. And that's what's cool about gratitude. It's like this secret weapon for boosting morale. Another technique that really resonated with me is what the author calls the "if you can't, I understand" approach. It's about giving the other person a graceful out, which, believe it or not, can actually make them more likely to help you. It sounds counterintuitive, right? Okay, imagine this. You're at the airport, your flight's delayed, and you need to reschedule. The gate agent is dealing with a mob of angry passengers. Do you think storming up there and demanding they fix your problem is going to get you anywhere? Probably not. But what if you approach them with empathy? Hey, I know you're swamped. And if there's absolutely no way to get me on another flight, I totally understand. But if by any chance there's something you can do, I'd be so grateful. See the difference? By acknowledging their situation, giving them an out, You're taking the pressure off. It's like you're saying, I see you, I respect your limitations. And that goes a long way. Speaking of which, building rapport is another big part of persuasion. It's about creating that instant connection, that click with someone, And it turns out there are some fascinating techniques for making that happen. One of the most intriguing is this thing called matching and mirroring. Now, before you picture yourself awkwardly copying someone's every move, hear me out. It's not about being creepy. It's about subtly syncing up with their body language, tone of voice, even breathing patterns. This technique is based on the principles of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP for short, which honestly is a whole other deep dive. But basically the idea is that by subtly mirroring the other person, you create this unconscious rapport, like you're speaking their language, not just verbally, but physically and emotionally. And that makes them feel more at ease, more open to your suggestions. Now, I know this might sound, a bit out there, but there's actually science behind it. Think about it. When you're having a great conversation with someone, you naturally start to match their energy. You lean in when they lean in, you smile when they smile. It's a subconscious way of connecting. And with matching and mirroring, you're just, tapping into that natural process. All right, we've covered a lot, but there's still more to unpack about the art of persuasion. In part 2 of our deep dive, we'll explore some even more advanced techniques, like how to handle those super tricky personalities and how to build those long-term persuasive relationships. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Okay, so we talked about, understanding others and building that rapport. But let's get into some more strategic techniques, for persuasion. Because sometimes, let's be real, you need a little extra finesse, especially when you're dealing with those really challenging personalities. One of the things that really stuck with me from the book was this idea: people are more likely to help you if you make them feel like they're in control. It's kind of like nobody likes to be bossed around, right? So instead of giving orders, the book suggests framing things as requests and offering choices. Like instead of saying, hey, can you finish this report by tomorrow?
Yeah.
You can say, hey, would you mind taking a look at this report? Would tomorrow work for you? Or would you prefer to have it done by Friday? You see the difference. It's subtle, but it gives them options, makes them feel like they're part of the decision. And that brings me to another interesting concept from the book, the yes person. Mm-hmm. Now, before you picture some spineless yes man, hold on. It's not about blind agreement. It's about having a positive attitude, and focusing on the possibilities within an idea. There's this great story in the book about the author's father. He was overseeing some renovations on his house, and the construction crew boss, he was this super negative guy, kept trying to bond with the author's dad by complaining about their wives.
That classic women, am I right? But the author's father, he didn't take the bait. Instead of joining in on the negativity, he just kept focusing on the positive aspects of his own marriage. It's like he refused to get dragged down. And eventually, the crew boss just kind of gave up. It's funny because, we often think of persuasion as this forceful thing, like you're trying to bend someone to your will. But what this story shows is that sometimes the most persuasive thing you can do is just hold your ground, stay positive. Speaking of positivity, another key idea in the book is consistency. Think about the people you trust the most. They're probably the ones who are consistently reliable, right? Honest. Their actions match their words. That consistency builds trust. And trust is the foundation of any strong relationship. Because who wants to deal with someone who's flaky, right? Or unpredictable? I remember working with this one client. He was notorious for changing his mind at the last minute. It was every time we got close to finishing a project, he'd throw a curveball and want to revamp everything. He was driving me nuts. And it was really damaging the relationship.
So I finally decided to, have a conversation with him about it. I explained how his inconsistency was creating all this extra work, making it hard to meet deadlines. And you know what? He actually appreciated the feedback. He hadn't realized how his actions were impacting others. And he actually made a conscious effort to be more consistent.
It's amazing how sometimes just open communication, setting clear expectations, can make a huge difference. Because at the end of the day, persuasion isn't about tricks or manipulation. It's about building those genuine connections and fostering trust. Now, conflict is inevitable, right? Even in the best relationships, there are going to be times when you disagree. But the book really emphasizes knowing how to disagree without being disagreeable. It's about finding that balance between expressing your own view and respecting the other person's perspective. Like, instead of saying you're wrong, try saying, I understand where you're coming from, but I see things a bit differently. You're acknowledging their viewpoint while still holding your own. And when you can do that, it creates space for real dialogue. One of my favorite parts of the book was the chapter on dealing with rude people. Because let's be real, we've all encountered them, right? Whether it's a grumpy coworker or some random person cutting you off in traffic, those negative vibes can really get to you. But the book, it offers some surprisingly effective strategies for handling those difficult people. One that really stuck with me was this idea of responding instead of reacting. You know how it is when someone's being rude, it's so easy to just like fire back, but that just escalates things, right? So instead of reacting defensively, the book suggests taking a breath, pausing, and choosing a more constructive response. It's about staying calm, even when the other person is losing it. I remember this one time I was dealing with this customer service rep who was being incredibly unhelpful. This guy was just like spewing negativity, and I could feel myself getting so frustrated, ready to just, let him have it. But then I remember what I'd read in the book. So instead of snapping back, I took a deep breath and said, look, I understand you're probably dealing with a lot right now, and I appreciate you trying to help. But can we please try to find a solution together? And you know what? It totally changed the whole tone of the conversation. He calmed down, apologized for his attitude, and we were actually able to work things out. It's amazing how sometimes just acknowledging the other person's humanity can disarm even the most difficult person. Because at the end of the day, we're all just, trying to figure things out. And a little kindness can go a long way. All right, so we've covered a lot in this deep dive, but there's one more fascinating piece of the persuasion puzzle we got to explore. The long game. How do you build those lasting relationships where persuasion becomes, almost effortless? We'll dive into that in the final part of our deep dive into the art of persuasion. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Okay, so we've talked about understanding, rapport, handling those tricky personalities, even using some Jedi mind tricks, right, to get people on your side. But now let's talk about the long game.
Persuasion that goes beyond those one-off interactions, the kind that helps you build those lasting relationships, where you actually have influence. One of the most powerful ideas in the book is this concept of becoming a friend rather than a foe. It's like, think about it. Who are you more likely to actually listen to be persuaded by? Someone you see as a friend or someone you see as like an adversary? It's kind of obvious, right? But how do you actually become that friend, that trusted advisor in someone's eyes? Well, according to the Art of Persuasion, it really comes down to consistency and that genuine connection. Remember how we talked about consistency being like the key to building trust? Well, that's even more important when it comes to, long-term persuasion. It's about showing up authentically, time and time again, proving that you walk the walk. There's this story in the book that really illustrates this. It's about this guy who was trying to, land this big client, and he knew this other guy. Let's call him Steve, who had a direct connection to the decision maker. But he wasn't sure if Steve would actually, make the introduction. So instead of just barging in with the ask, he started by building a real relationship with Steve. He'd reach out regularly, not just to talk business, but to check in on, Steve's life, ask about his family, offer to help with projects that Steve was working on. He basically became, a friend, a valuable resource, someone Steve could rely on. And guess what? When the time came to ask for that intro, Steve didn't even hesitate. He was happy to help because they built that trust, that rapport. It's like
Think about it in your own life. Who are you most willing to go out of your way for? It's those friends who have consistently been there for you, right? Who've shown you they care. It's the same in business, in networking, in any relationship where you want to build influence. Consistency builds trust, and trust, it opens doors. Now, building that kind of trust, it takes time, right? It's not something you can fake, but there are things you can do to cultivate those genuine connections, the kind that lead to long-term persuasion. One of the simplest yet most overlooked techniques is, well, personalized thank you notes. I know. Sounds kind of old school, right? In our digital world. But trust me, a handwritten note, it can really go a long way. It makes people feel valued. I used to think, oh, who even reads those anymore? But then I started making an effort to actually send them out. Not just for big favors, but for those small, everyday things people do. I'd send a note to a colleague who helped me out on a project, or to a friend who, just listened while I was venting. And the responses I got, they were amazing. People were genuinely touched. It made them feel seen, appreciated, and it strengthened the connection in a way that an email just couldn't. It's in a world that's so fast-paced and impersonal, taking that extra time, it really makes a difference. You stand out, and you lay the groundwork for a lasting relationship. Another key part of long-term persuasion is knowing how to handle disagreements.
Yeah.
Because let's be real, even with your best friends, you're not going to agree on everything. But the book, it stresses the importance of disagreeing without, being disagreeable. It's about expressing your viewpoint while still respecting the other person's perspective. Instead of saying you're wrong, try saying, I see things a bit differently. You're acknowledging their view while still holding your own. And that creates space for real dialogue. Now, sometimes no matter how hard you try, you're going to run into people who are just, difficult. You know the type, right? Those folks who seem to thrive on conflict and negativity. But the book has this surprisingly effective strategy for those personalities. The pre-apology approach. It sounds weird, but it's basically apologizing in advance for any inconvenience you might cause, which, believe it or not, can actually disarm them, make them more open to what you're asking. Imagine you're at the airport ticket counter and you need to make a complicated change to your itinerary. Instead of being all demanding, try starting with something like, hey, I'm so sorry to bother you with this. I know this might be a hassle, but
by acknowledging that you might be causing them extra work, you're showing respect. And respect goes a long way, especially with someone who's already stressed. And you know what else? Sometimes just admitting you don't know something can be incredibly persuasive. It's about setting aside your ego, right? Acknowledging that you don't have all the answers. Let's say you're dealing with some technical issue and you have no idea how to fix it. Instead of pretending to be an expert, just say, you know what? I'm totally lost here. You clearly know way more about this than I do. What would you suggest? By doing that, you're not only showing humility, but you're also giving the other person a chance to shine. And let's be honest, everyone likes to feel like the expert, so it's a win-win. All right, so we've covered a lot in this deep dive into the art of persuasion. Talked about understanding others, building rapport, handling those tough personalities, even using a little, Jedi mind trickery. But what it really boils down to is this. Persuasion isn't about manipulation. It's about genuine connection, respect, understanding.
it's about building relationships where influence happens naturally, not through force, but through trust and mutual benefit. And you know what? That's pretty powerful. It's about shifting our mindset from how can I get what I want to how can we create a win-win. So next time you need to persuade someone, remember what we've talked about today. Put yourself in their shoes, seek to understand them, build rapport, and be consistent. And most importantly, approach every interaction wanting a positive outcome for everyone involved. You might be surprised at what you can achieve when you master the art of, persuasion.